بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. Thank you for coming. What are we doing today?
So we want to talk about the concept of your book, right? And what it is, why do you think it's important? And let's just start with what it is.
What it is it's about thinking. It's about to understand the way we think, to understand how that thinking process is built in our heads. That way, when we face a challenge from someone else, when we face a problem, when someone comes to us and say, there is there's a contradiction of some sort in your belief, or in your faith, or in Islam, and you get challenged by that, so you could be able to answer that in a logical way that, first of all, doesn't necessarily address the one who is challenging you, but to have personal satisfaction, because that's more important than actually others, is to personally feel comfortable and secure with what you think and what you believe. And the way of thinking has a lot to do with that, in the sense that when I look at any object in front of me, I have to understand how my brain is viewing what's in front of it, and it's processing that, and how am I building further knowledge in the future based on what I understood here today. That way of thinking, to understand how we think in Islamic perspective, is very important to answer all those challenges that will face us.
Okay, so your thesis is you want to analyze how Islamic thought is perceived today. Is that it?
How Islam is perceived, yes.
And by Muslims, we're not talking
by
about
Muslims.
By Muslims.
Yes. The entire thing is by Muslims, for Muslims, and for the benefit of Muslims. How we understand Islam, how we understand our deen, how that understanding, how is that built inside our heads, inside our brains? What are the building blocks? If you think of it as a set of Lego blocks, how these building blocks? What's number one? What's number two? What's number three? How is that mental framework that is obviously otherwise known as a paradigm is built in our heads, and how we came about to thinking the way we're thinking, and how that particular paradigm that we have in our head affects how we react and address problems or challenges that face us on daily basis. Whether those problems or challenges face us in our daily lives as Muslims, in Muslim countries and Muslim societies, or whether they come as a challenge from outside Muslim societies.
Great. So that makes perfect sense. Okay, why are we doing this? Why are you doing this?
Why am I doing this? I think it's for me, the main trigger for me was, since I went to a medical school, the main trigger for me was a particular hadith in Sahih Muslim that gives a time frame for the development of the embryo. That hadith that gives a time frame for development of embryo, which is of course described in the Quran, but the hadith gives a time frame and the stages from a sperm to a what is translated as a drop of blood, or alaqa, to a mudgha, and so on. That hadith gives a time frame of 40 days to 40 days to 40 days. And this is exactly an example of what I mean by a challenge. You get outside Islam, you get a new input in your life. For example, a person going to a medical school, they learn a subject called embryology. Embryology is the study of an embryo. In an Islamic perspective, or at least that was your understanding at the time, those stages have to be 40 days and 40 days and 40 days, for a total of 120 days before you get to something that looks like a human being. And the reality of embryology as a science, I'm not talking about the theories of embryology, I'm talking about the observations of embryology. It's very important to distinguish between observations and theories. Observations is what's really out there, regardless of what is the explanation for that. Theory is the explanation. the observation of embryology does not fit this time frame. So where is the problem? Because you were brought up in a way that, that tells you, oh, this is Islam. But now you're getting a challenge. But the question is this really Islam? How do you resolve this contradiction?
Okay, so first, this was a personal trigger for you.
Yes.
That made you kind of start this path, and then after a while, you started to kind of question, the entire paradigm that we, that with our understanding and how we perceive Islam today.
Yes, not question in a sort of a negative feeling of the word, although some of that is inevitable, but more to try to understand the thinking process.
Okay.
Of how we came to believe this, and what are those elements in our, if you think of our minds, if you think of the paradigm as an operating system of a computer, for example, Windows, for example, what are the building blocks of that operating system? Because that operating system defines the applications after it. The whole computer runs based on that operating system. Obviously, the true motivation behind this is to find a resolution to the contradiction.
Right.
Because I was basically faced with, if I didn't do this work on my own and this investigation research on my own, I was faced with one of two choices, neither which I've liked. Either I would accept the contradiction and keep my faith, and in doing so, I'm admitting that this is nonsensical, or at least part of it is nonsensical.
Okay. Before we go on that, let's define the contradiction, exactly what it is.
Contradiction.
No, not what contradiction means. Define exactly what the hadith says about embryology and what it actually is and what it's written in the Quran.
So the Quran talks about phases.
Right.
Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, nutfa, alaqa, mudgha. And then after that, the Quran talks, about that creation is going on to become something else. ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر. The hadith gives time frames. Gives 40 days, 40 days, 40 days. And then the angel comes and first there's nafkhat al-ruh, or the dissemination of ruh to that creation. And the angel comes and start writing down things such as this person's future in terms of how much income, or generally what are the provisions that will be bestowed upon him, and if he's going to be happy or one of the damned, and so forth.
So for next time, when mentioning a particular hadith, we need to list it exactly what it is, what the hadith exactly says, what book it was found.
Yes.
So we would have all of that.
This one is in Muslim.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when talking about verses of Quran, we should just say the whole verse and where it is all the time, so that everything is crystal clear about exactly what we are talking about. So anybody who wants to follow can follow along.
Definitely. And then the problem is that this understanding of embryology that is based on a little bit on the Quran, but mostly on this hadith, has a fiqh application about abortion in terms of what is lawful before what time frame and what is unlawful after what time frame, and that cutoff is 120 days. And if some, at least of the fiqh schools, say that let's say 115 days it's okay to have abortion, but when you go out again, you have a new input into the system. Someone goes out and studies medicine, and part studying medicine, they get exposed to another discipline of knowledge called embryology. And the observation of embryology contradicts this time frame, and then you're faced. Okay, so now we're.
And what is the observation?
The observation is, no matter how you want to define those three phases, no matter how you define them, they're obviously a pre-human configuration. And the human configuration in embryology is established somewhere around the 8th week. Now we're talking 40, 50 days, 60 days at the most. You have a little human being. It's not nutfa, it's not mudgha, it's not alaqa, and it's not mudgha. So whatever you want to define those categories are, you're done with the time frame somewhere around 40 to 50, maybe 60 days at the most. 120 days is beyond an offshoot. I mean, it's an ethical issue, to say the least. So that was personally for me. But then, as you know, as you start down this pathway, you know, I wouldn't have gone down this path to fix just a small problem. I found that we are all subject to challenges, and I want to talk about that stress in a more systemic point of view. Our civilization, the current Muslim civilization, is a civilization that is subdued, is a civilization that is defeated. We are not at the helm of civilization. So whenever you have a successful civilization that is shining on the world, like the Western civilization, all the other civilizations that are dysfunctional, and what I mean by dysfunctional, they're not at the helm. They're not guiding the lives of those societies. It becomes under stress. That civilization, it becomes under stress of the dominant civilization, and the end result of that, basically the mechanism of that stress is the product of the dominant civilization, i.e. the Western civilization, is running the show for everyone, is running the show for us economically, and from an industrial standpoint. They decide what is to be manufactured, we just buy it. They decide what political systems must prevail, we just accept. And a lot of times we don't even accept political systems that are good for us, such as all the dictatorships in the Middle East, for example. They are in control of the planet. We are just followers. We don't have much to say. So that, because they are at the helm and we are not, because we don't have anything to hold on to, sooner or later, when people realize that dysfunction in our lives, they're going to ask why. See, people don't respond the same to stress. Some people respond to stress by going back to an area where they're more comfortable. Usually it's the past. You know, that called retraction. Some people respond to stress by trying to leave what they know and get incorporated into the dominant society or civilization. Others respond to stress by trying to make real change, but sometimes violent change. And a fourth typical is when you respond to stress because your environment is not exactly what you want, and you respond to stress by creating a fictitious environment. This is more like the Sufis or the excessive types of Sufis. So stress, by definition, if you want to actually define what the word stress from a civilization standpoint, it means the reality around you, the reality around the Muslim world, the reality of the Muslim world compared to our own expectations. Because when we are raised as Muslims, and we have the doctrine of salvation, but we don't have a doctrine of salvation only for the hereafter, like the Christians. We have a doctrine of salvation for today and the hereafter. But that doctrine of salvation for today is dysfunctional, is put on the shelf, because the reality someone else is in control. So that disconnect between our expectations for ourselves, that we have the doctrine of salvation for this day before the next, but the reality of around us is completely different. So that disconnect creates the stress, creates the internal psychological contradictions. And from that, people's responses to that stress, the answer to that stress are different. So because the people's response to that stress are different, again, some elements will try to incorporate, run forward basically, incorporate with the dominant civilization, and they would just say yes, 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 yes to everything that is being said, and they basically grab a whip and start whipping themselves on the back, and you see that in the Arab world. Maybe for you, being a second generation, it may maybe some of this may not sound very familiar, but if you were raised in an Arabic world, especially at this day and age, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. Some retract completely backward, run back to the good old days. They hang on to what they have, with their teeth, But the problem is they hang on to everything that they have and bite on it with teeth without discriminating what is valuable and what is not valuable. They come and claim and tell you, no, what you have is functional, it is not dysfunctional, but then they dogmatically present that to you in a way. Like for example, coming back to my example, if I go to a sheikh and I ask him, Sheikh, we are allowing abortion up to 120 days, but reality is different than this time frame. So how would the sheikh respond? First of all, he might not even know that there is a contradiction to begin with, because they are so much situated in their own world. But even if he is presented with this, he would not be able to give you a good answer. Why? Because he will not be able to challenge his paradigm. Pure and simple. His paradigm is fixed, it's concrete, it's calcified. It's unable to answer the challenge. This is the key point. If your paradigm is unable to answer the challenge, with time you will be crushed under the stress. If you're answering the challenge by abandoning your paradigm completely and running forward, then you lost your identity. You lost it. You may look like someone who is benefiting and civilized and living a good life, but you lost it. You're nothing. You're nobody. And the problem is the Arab civilization, and I mean by Arab civilization as an archetypical Muslim civilization, not just a national civilization, but the Arab Muslim civilization is dissolving, purely and simply. It's dissolving. It's hard to see this in a short time frame, but in a long time frame, it's dissolving. Asia, for example, the country which you are descended from, is completely different before and after the British invasion. The British invasion left almost irreparable scars in the fabric of society of Egypt, on a mental, intellectual, cognitive level. And you see that in those different types of people. So the reaction to stress, first of all, the presence of stress is there, whether we recognize it or not. We're going to be faced with challenges, whether we recognize it or not, whether we accept it or not, and how we respond to that stress, how we respond to those contradictions, how we respond to those challenges that are being presented by the dominant civilization of this planet is going to fundamentally impact who we are going forward.
Okay, so we talked a lot. You talked a lot about the different problems that face the Muslims today, right? Mm-hmm. And how people are reacting to it. You clearly stated that there is a disconnect, that there's something not working, right? And we can see it. But now, I want to kind of bring it back to what we first started talking about, which is this concept of paradigm that we have. And why do you think that the paradigm is the cause of the problem that we have, right? From what you're saying, I'm kind of gathering that when they are under this stress, they do not know how to react to the stress. And they don't have the proper tools to deal with this stress, because the tools that they have is dated, right? I think that's what you're getting on. I'm not 100% sure. I think that's what you're getting on. Assuming that they are trying to deal with it as opposed to, abandoning it altogether and whatnot. But what I want to do is I want to bring it back to the concept of what is the Islamic paradigm, because it seems like everything is going to revolve around that, and we need to know exactly what it is, and then give it a time frame as to chronologically of how it got to where it is, why it's problematic, and why it's creating this. And after we go over that, we need to also understand why. So you said a few things we need to I lost my train of thought.
It's all right. So, I'm not going to go into detail what is Islamic paradigm right now because there's a complete chapter on that. But I will tell you from this moment, and it's very important to understand this concept. The Islamic paradigm is more than Islam. Islamic paradigm is Islam plus a human being. If you want to put it in the mathematical equation, the Islamic paradigm is Islam plus a
And
human.
when you say Islam, you mean really it's the purest form, the
Yes.
religion of God.
Yes.
And it's absolute.
In
pure.
absolute reduced form.
You know, whatever theoretically that is.
Exactly. Plus a human being. And this is important because every human being at every point in time, addressing any subject whatsoever, not just religion, has a paradigm of some sort, whether they recognize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
You, as a Muslim, you have a paradigm about Islam. That paradigm, of course, in your case and my case, comes in the Sunni version of that paradigm. If you are studying cosmology, you have a paradigm that you're thinking about. It's the way, it's the adapter between your brain and reality that you're trying to entertain or understand. You can't understand reality in your brain directly. It has to go through some kind of operating system, and that is called a paradigm. This is how you view the world, how you view, in evolution there's a paradigm, in history there's a paradigm, even in sociology and society there is a paradigm. There's always some kind of mental framework. Through the utilization of it, you will understand whatever you're trying to understand. And that mental framework is not a divine product. And that's a key point. That mental framework is a human construct built around the divine revelation. And because it's a human construct, it is, and because the way it is developed, and we'll talk about how a paradigm is developed in general and how the Muslim Islamic paradigm is developed in particular. But the way it is developed through a friction with the surrounding, through the friction of the reality of that human being. So it's Islam plus a human being, but it's dependent, that final product, the paradigm, is dependent on the experiences of that human being. It is not isolated from the environment of that human being.
The first question I would then ask you is then, if this is God's religion, right? And He has defined it, so what makes you think that it is Islam plus a human being? If this is it's God religion. Like everybody who is a staunch believer will tell you that no, you remove this plus human being thing. It's this is the religion that that God sent upon us, and we are just doing what it is that required it.
Yes, because at some point, as you build, as you screen your faith, as you learn your faith, as you understand your faith, as you understand the details of the faith, that faith, you face a very important thing. You face choices. You have to make choices of how to interpret and how to understand. For example, the choices that Imam Bukhari faced in constructing his book, Sahih al-Bukhari. He had a lot of hadiths to choose from. He made choices, best guess, good effort, good faith, experienced choices, but he made choices. And those choices that he made in how to select what he called as Sahih, obviously those choices impact the final product, which is the book, Sahih. And he got, without the repetitions, roughly around 4,000 hadiths. And his student, Imam Muslim, also faced those choices. Again, I'm talking about human choices. The Quran didn't tell us how to choose Sahih Hadith from non-Sahih Hadith. We made that in a good or more to the point, Imam Bukhari as a scholar in this, and of course he's not the only one, but he is a typical example of this. He made choices. His successor or his student, Imam Muslim, faced those same choices, and he made slightly different choices. And the final product, his Sahih, came about also roughly around 4,000 hadiths without the repetition. But there were not exactly those 4,000 hadiths that Imam Bukhari has chosen. In fact, the difference between the two is there's some overlap, of course, and this is called muttafaq alayh. But the difference is somewhere around 1,000 or 2,000 hadiths. And more important, the difference between the narrators that they've chosen as reliable, like the Rijal, the difference between them is in the order of 1,000 narrator. Like this guy, for example, he chose 500 that the other rejected, and this guy chose 500 that the other rejected. So as you try to build the details of your food, or as you try, not for you, and for me, it will be as we try to study the details of that faith. We are faced with choices, and those human choices could have gone in a different way. I mean, you and I didn't make those choices. Someone else in the past, again, from good faith, good experience, good judgment, they made those choices, but they're not divine. That's the key. So you cannot create, you cannot build your religion 100% isolated from human contribution. I'll give you an example in Christianity, for a very good example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَهْبَانِيَةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا. Rahbaniyatan, the system of priesthood and nunhood for the women. He says, ابتدعوها. They invented it. They created it. And then after that he says, مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ. We did not prescribe it for them. We did not make it obligatory for them. We did not enforce it upon them. وَرَهْبَانِيَةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ. And then he gives, and he says something very interesting. It almost sounds like he is justifying it for them. He says, إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ رِضْوَانِ اللَّهِ. Except to seek the pleasure of Allah. So, Rahbaniyah, they created it. We did not ask them to do so, but they did it for the sake of Allah. It almost sounds like he's saying, it's
excusing.
He's giving an excuse. And then he says something even more interesting. فَمَا رَعُوهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. They did not take good care of it as it was supposed to be taken care of. Now, what does that tell you? Does that tell you he is giving them room to do something on their own, but as long as they take good care of it, as long as it falls within the general theme. So
what makes you think that the room that Allah has given for the Christians, to try and figure it out or whatnot, is also what he gave to Muslims? I mean, Muslims will always say that, Sayyidina Muhammad came as the seal of the prophets. That everything that wasn't done properly, that was misunderstood or mistranslated or whatever you want to say, it ends when Sayyidina Muhammad comes, and then he clears everything up and he says, this is the religion of God, and it is and like the famous khutbah that he gave, like, today I have completed my deen. So why do you think that we have that right?
Very good question. Number one, it's not us. Again, it's entire humanity. Every single human being that is entertaining any topic you want to talk about or you could think of is using, consciously or subconsciously, some form of a paradigm. And that paradigm has human element into it. So we are not a special case in this. This is a human condition. A human condition in trying to approach something. But more to your point, what's the proof? What's the proof? Well, it's very simple. Open any fiqh book and you will find, at least 4 different opinions about every matter. And as time goes on in the Muslim Ummah, you will find more and more and more variations. If there was just one crystal clear, 100% divine version of Islam, you wouldn't find all the varying opinions. So as you add more and more of that human contribution, which is not a problem. I mean, I'm not saying it's blasphemy or it's nature. It's nature of how you understand any subject. You inject some of you into how you understand it. As you add more and more human element, you will get more and more varieties. And then when that paradigm is built, for example, the paradigm for the school of Iraq, the Abi Hanifa school, at least its early version, there's a different paradigm for the school of Medina for Imam Malik. There is a third paradigm for Imam Shafi'i. As time goes by and more human experiences are accumulated, and more of those human experiences are injected into that paradigm, you get more and more variations. And here's a key point. Paradigm is not about who is absolutely true and who is absolutely wrong. As long as there's a human component to that paradigm, it is subject to fallibility. It is subject to error. But some paradigms are functional, meaning they work in real life. And some paradigms are dysfunctional. It goes back to my point. All of this that we're talking about tangible problems that we face here. For example, I'll give you examples.
Before you go to example, let's pause it and then start a new video.
Okay.